Kunal, you just tell me whenever I'm supposed to start.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. We are good to start now.
Right. So, very warm good morning to our panelists and all our viewers who've joined us for our session today. I really appreciate that despite today being the first day of the weekend, you've cared to join us at Center for National Policy Research to discuss an issue of grave importance in today's time. So, the past few weeks have been really challenging for Afghanistan and its citizens, and I believe it's our imperative duty as humanity to raise as many voices as possible for policymakers, for decision makers across the world to help in restoring the lost peace and the rights of the people of Afghanistan. So, in our bid to do the same, today in the discussion, we have both young voices as well as seasoned insights for us to get deeper understanding of what's happening in Afghanistan and the impact of what's happening on the women of the country. So, before we begin anything, I'd request all the panelists to please switch on their cameras, and all the other participants, I'd request you to please keep yourselves on mute. So first off, we have Dr. Sayak Bhattacharya, who is the founder and director at Center for National Policy Research, CNPR. He's an educationist with over 2 decades of experience in the leading institutions of India as well as US. Mr. Oshik Das Gupta, who's the director of operations at Convert City. He has expertise in foreign policy, migration, crisis mitigation, climate action, etc. We have Mr. Tridivesh Singh Maini, who is a New Delhi-based policy analyst, and he's associated with the Jindal School of International Affairs, OP Jindal Global University, and has been the South Asian Voice visiting fellow Winter 2016 with the Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. He's also an Asia Society India-Pakistan Regional Young Leaders Initiative Fellow 2013-14, and the public policy scholar with the Hindu Center for Politics and Public Policy, Chennai. On the youth voices front, we have Khushbu, who's pursuing her bachelor's in political science from Sri Aurobindo College, Delhi University. Then we have Sri Rupa, who's done her MPhil in international relations from Jadavpur University. Shaumya, who's pursuing her master's in political science from Banaras Hindu University. Kayal Vizi, who is doing her master's in development management from Madras School of Economics. Rehan, who's pursuing master's in economics from BITS Pilani. And finally, Sandeepan, who's pursuing his bachelor's in political science from Ramjas College. So I believe we have a great mix of thoughts, and I'm looking forward to this insightful session today. I welcome you all on the board. Thanks for coming. So coming back to the situation in Afghanistan, after US decided to leave or withdraw its troops from Afghanistan, I believe none of us anticipated that Taliban would be so quick in capturing the entire country in such short time. So this, I'm sure, will have very severe impending humanitarian crisis across the country, and lives of thousands of Afghan people is hanging by the thread, quite literally. We saw in multiple videos where people are falling off the aircrafts. So quite literally, their lives are hanging by the threads, and they're at the mercy of whatever Taliban deems is right for them. And that's why I believe we have very strong reasons to be worried about the fate of Afghan women, particularly, I believe, women from middle to upper class families who've mostly benefited from what happened post US came in 2001. The Taliban is going to impose draconian laws and is going to rob these young girls and women of their agencies. So, if you go back in history, during 1990s, the Taliban not only brutally imposed its social restrictions on women, but also restricted their access to healthcare, they restricted their access to education, they restricted their access to jobs. So, they prohibited women from entering in public, and which automatically meant that the widows and the children of the widows would die of starvation because they did not have any male companion to go with. And this is the sad situation that is going to prevail now that Taliban has again come to the country. And at that point in time, there were just 3 countries who legitimized the presence of this Taliban-led government. But in present times, Taliban is trying to give out an image that it's Taliban 2.0, it's very women friendly, so to say, and that they're going to care about the rights of all the people and forgive the people who snitched about them to the US forces. But the video evidences that have come obviously indicate otherwise. However, there have been some countries like China who are still choosing to believe, instead of the videographic evidences that are coming out of Afghanistan, that Taliban has changed for good and that they will carry out a peaceful transition. As for India, I believe we're in a if you do, you're damned, and if you don't do, you're still damned sort of situation. So everybody, say US, China, Russia, Pakistan, India, everybody's in a big kind of fix. What's to be done? Nobody wants to engage with the terrorists, but also they have so much at stake to be lost. So carrying this forward, I'd like to uh, ask Tridivesh sir to help us understand what exactly would be the geopolitical implication now that Taliban has taken over Afghanistan. So,
Oh. Thank you, Sayak ji. Uh, Thank you to all the interns for all the hard work you put in actually to get together this event. And thank you, Kanishka, for the introduction. Now, you know, just a couple of things to start with. I don't know whether it's more hazardous to make predictions about Afghanistan or to call yourself an expert about Afghanistan or about anything related to geopolitics. So to begin with, I would refrain from making any predictions. What I am going to do is I'm just going to try to highlight some of the important trends, which so far, and what implications they can have. And also, of course, what the I'll also try to just give a brief overview of some of the the narratives which are being discussed at this point of time in the context of international relations. Firstly, if you look at it from the US standpoint, the emphasis has been on the fact that this is, a Saigon moment for the US, right? And there is this talk about American decline. As far as American exceptionalism was concerned, even American realists themselves had earlier only said that long time ago, they started saying that this is delusional. This talk about US exceptionalism and everything. Now, we may think that this is the beginning of the American decline, and naturally, I mean, obviously, this has had an impact on how the US is perceived even by its allies, the withdrawal and everything. But we must also remember that the narrative within the US has changed. There is a bipartisan consensus which tilts towards being less interventionist, and this has been dubbed as what is called the Quincy coalition. So you have both Republicans, you have both Democrats who have been arguing that basically that US does not need to be excessively interventionist. It should not be preaching to the rest of the world about what is right and what is wrong. The reasons, of course, are very different, by the realists and the liberals on the one hand, and the Democrats and the Republicans are on the same page. But essentially, the pendulum now has swung towards the US being more inward looking, and this is part of that that Quincy coalition sort of, and this has been there earlier also. I mean, we've had talk about America first and everything. So to link the, I mean, obviously this has had an impact geopolitically, it's going to have massive impact, but again, to the talk about the American decline and everything, that at this point of time is premature, because if even if we are talking about the American decline, who's filling in the vacuum? So we need to bear that in mind. I'm not, obviously American prestige has during the Trump, not just during the Trump administration, even earlier many a times it's been battered. But what is the alternative? And here I would like to bring in the fact that even China itself realizes that it cannot fill in the vacuum in certain areas. And if you look at post the takeover by the Taliban, another very interesting thing is that the US Secretary of State first called his Chinese and his Russian counterparts. So when we talk about even this great power jostling and the great power tango, the China and Russia on the one hand, US on the other, even that is, when you actually look at it on the ground, they will have to, there's no other way, but they will find common ground. So that's one part where we don't need to look, we should not look at issues in binaries. Yes, the great powers will have their rivalries. There'll be many other, within Afghanistan, there'll be areas where they'll have rivalries, but they will also have to work together. Not because anybody is good or bad, but because it's a compulsion. And obviously we're always going to have this tussle between values and interests. So if you look at the Western world's reaction, to begin with, it was very different. But if you also look at what China and Russia have said so far, they have categorically also put forward their apprehensions to the Taliban on issues of women's rights and things like that. So there is no sort of black and white, and this is a clear reiteration of that. And a lot of the analysis actually reminds me of what has been called as Miles' law, that where you stand depends upon where you sit. I mean, this was said about the American bureaucracy, but if you look at all analysis, not just academic but even otherwise, on social media, on the media and everything else, I think we are looking at it. Obviously we all have our biases, and we each person is entitled to them, but we should not be tampering with the facts. Now, if one were to look at so far, if one were to look at it, there is apprehension, there is worry, and that is justified. But at the same time, what is happening is, you have one set of people who are only showing the positive statements which are being made by the Taliban, the right noises. And then on the other hand, you have those who are, who are totally ignoring the right noises. So simply put, to be very utopian and to be, have this tinted sort of impression that, Taliban is the best thing which has happened, this is the end of imperialism, US imperialism and all, that is one stretch. But to also declare Armageddon, without actually judging them, but there have been some incidents which have caused concern. But at this point of time, it's not because Taliban is good or Taliban is bad. We must remember that at the end of the day, when you look at China, China also has economic interests there, and China will also need to ensure that there is a certain, not even not just the security interest, but also a certain amount of moderation, which it has yesterday. If you look at the statement by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, they've spoken about the fact that there needs to be a certain amount of moderation, and the aspirations of the international community need to be addressed. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but we cannot ignore this. If on the one hand we are saying that China, the US has left and China has taken over along with Russia, then we should also look at the fact that China has actually said this, about the Taliban. So now whether this happens or not, that remains to be seen. Because obviously the other thing is which we need to understand, that obviously even the Taliban is not a monolith. There are going to be internecine, clashes within them, right? So this is this is one part of it. The whole thing about the US, the great powers jostling, the whether the right noises have been made or the wrong noises have been made. We also need to look at some of the other players which are going to have a very important role outside, what outside obviously US and China, Russia, and everything. For instance, Iran is going to have a very important role, right? Iran obviously has close links to the Taliban as well. And in fact, that is why many people have been making this argument that the US should make the right concessions to Iran, so that there can be a proper back channel through which the US actually opens another back channel with the Taliban through Iran, and Iran will be useful in that context. That's one part of it. Then you have the GCC countries. UAE has a good relationship with the US. In fact, UAE is going to be giving a temporary asylum also to some Afghans who are in transit. And obviously we know about Qatar. All these talks were held actually in Qatar. I mean, Qatar was the initiate, and even the overseas office of the Taliban in 2013 was set up in Qatar, right? So what I'm trying to say is that at this point of time, it's too uh, premature to say that, oh, the Taliban has changed because they've held one press conference. But it's equally premature to say that they're going to be the same as they were last time, and this is the so concerns are one thing, ground realities are the other, right? And obviously, I mean, each country sees its own interests, and if China wants its economic interests to be fulfilled in Afghanistan, it is not going to happen without the Taliban at least moderating itself slightly. So that is one thing we need to look at. Then, as I said, you need to look at the other players beyond the great powers. I mean, so in the Middle East, for instance, what is going to happen and everything else, right? And then after this whole power play, depending upon the roles of China, Russia, GCC, and all, then we can make a better prediction about how things are going to actually pan out in uh, South Asia. But as far as women and minorities are concerned, I think the concerns are really legitimate. You cannot just brush them off. As I said, because you feel that US imperialism has ended, it's not. It doesn't mean that the Taliban is right on it. But those issues, you have to sort of give some time. You have to see how as I said, it's not a monolith, how things work out within the Taliban itself, and what role do the external powers able to moderate the Taliban? Are they successful in doing so or not? The fact is the Taliban needs economic investments. It needs other countries for reconstruction. That's why they've said about pragmatic relations, and that is where other countries can actually push them, to moderate their stance to whatever degree possible. So I think I'd like to end with these points, and these are just. I think you would have more interesting things to say actually. So I'd like to listen to you. At the end of it, we can discuss some of these points later on. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I had a quick question. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yeah. I can't hear you.
So I had a quick question about. I have been hearing a lot of voices about that there should at least be some sort of conversation from the Indian side, because now that Taliban is going to legitimately form a government in Afghanistan, a lot of people have been. There've been voices that India should at least try some conversation and do something about it. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, it's always if you cannot influence the course of events, you have to obviously have a back channel. And that obviously has been there. I mean, now obviously, in this is not in the public domain that, which talks have been held, and they're not supposed to be as well. But given the fact that the foreign minister actually visited Iran in July at a time when the Taliban delegation, his visit coincided with the Taliban delegation's visit in July, and also his recent meeting with the Qatari foreign minister as well, where they discussed Afghanistan and everything. There obviously is a back channel, and I mean, that's a foregone conclusion. Now, to what degree, I mean, has that been effective? That time will tell. As I said, I mean, 1 week is a very short time to predict, what is really going to happen. And to say that, as I said, I mean, to say that in 2 decades they've totally changed, that's also wrong. That's, that lacks nuance. And to say that there'll be no change, that is also. So I think after about a few weeks, and also what we need to keep a continuous watch on is what sort of voices do Beijing and Moscow make with regard to the formal recognition, and whether they keep on putting these conditions about moderation. I mean, that is something which you really need to keep a watch on. And Britain also now has spoken about uh, engaging with the Taliban based on certain conditions. So ultimately everybody is going to do it. It depends upon who's more effective, who has more leverage ultimately.
Right. Thank you. I request my fellow moderators to please take the conversation ahead.
Yes, sir. So I had a quick question, sir. So, like, in this era of like when the Taliban regime has taken up, so like women have been a party to a violence, like for like eternity in Afghanistan, like their orthodox point of views and everything. And so, with the coming of this Taliban regime, the situation now seems to be out of control. So, like, how do you think that the effect on women means how the Taliban regime will affect the women's rights and their freedom?
See, so our views are based on a mix. One, that the mixed signals are giving this time, that some sort of If you look at the press conference, if you look at what they're saying publicly, some of the events which have happened, which have naturally caused concern, as I said earlier, and obviously on the sort of track record in the past. But we are not none of us should be in the business of predictions, right? We are here to highlight the important trends and possible outcomes A, B, C. You cannot really say that this is going to happen, that they're going to be very bad, or that's not. But base, as I said, what the X factor will be, that which external force is most influential, and for that external force, is human rights a priority? Is women's rights a priority? Now, for China, human rights is not a priority, but as I said, for their economic interests, they need to show the rest of the world that they brought about a certain amount of moderation, and women's rights per se are important, right? So it's a complex bag. There's no black and white to say that this is going to happen, this is not going to happen, right? It just depends upon the various X factors and the various players involved and who has more leverage. So that's how I would put it.
Thank you, sir. Uh, Kanishka, can we please continue?
For the same question, we would like to move to one of our expert panelists, Oishik sir. If you could please put forth your views on this.
Right. So I'll be speaking mostly throughout this small talk. It will mostly be on what are the kind of social impacts that are there. What is the Taliban? What is the degree, like Sir spoke about before? What is the degree to which the conservative Taliban can be eased, can be allowed to venture with their own understandings of what women's rights are, because obviously there is a clash. There is obviously a clash because today the Taliban is giving a statement. Not today, like a few days back, Taliban gave a statement: all women can work, uh, provided they uh, follow the hijab, follow uh, these certain norms, right? Then there are also at the same time there are reports of them saying that all citizens must give up their women to soldiers of Taliban for their marriage and for their uh, for them, for like they have to be gifts to the Talibani soldiers who have helped uh, uh, Afghanistan gain independence from the United States. What I'll also try to talk about is the general uh, history of the kind of problem these people have faced, especially women. Not history, but like in general, what is our understanding of their problems? A few weeks back, I was watching a show. The show was obviously American propaganda. I'm not sure whether you watched the show. It's called Madam Secretary. It's a make-believe show where a certain former CIA operative is now the president of the United States. Uh, is now the president of the United States and has appointed one of his CIA back in the day CIA friends as the Secretary of State of the United States. She goes around and she tries to talk about a peace treaty in Afghanistan and tries to talk about US forces moving away from Afghanistan. And within a lot of melodrama and a lot of antics and drama, she says that she is in a fix. She's in a fix. What is the fix? The fix is that the Taliban has said that we will allow women to continue with their education. We will allow women to work. What we will not allow is women in government positions or for political positions, and we will not allow women to drive. Okay, so two things that are in many ways not possible, and in that particular, like, not acceptable around the world. Like if you come and tell someone in the US or in the UK that women will not be allowed to take political uh, position, they'll start talking about the 1920 movement, they'll start talking about the feminist movement, first wave of feminism, and so on and so forth. But for Afghanistan, that show uh, made a presumption that this is a win. This is a situation where Afghanistan will be, where the Taliban will be more or less uh, open to the idea of women going to school, but not open to the idea that women are in a position of power. So that was depicted as a win for them. It was depicted as a diplomatic win for the United States in that show. And I was just watching it a few days ago. It's a make-believe show, and today we've come at that juncture. We've come at that juncture where the US was supposed to take a call, and they didn't. They didn't. They left. They left the US. They left Afghanistan. And the fate of such women are now at the hands of whatever feminism is understood by the Taliban, or whatever women's right is understood by the Taliban. So when we are talking about positioning, when we're talking about recognition of the Taliban as a legitimate governing body of Afghanistan, the negotiating power that other countries have is these sorts of considerations, right? Like Sir was saying before, that how did someone asked a question? I think Kanishka asked a question about India speaking up to Afghanistan, right? At what level? Of course, what Sir said, that there are back channel talks happening, like is supposedly happening, because obviously that should not be in the public domain, that sort of communication. Tehran being a point of contact, Qatar being a point of contact, that sort of communication should not be out in public, and I hope India is engaging in that sort of communication. But what we should understand is that at what lines, when India goes public with her communication, what lines of leveraging will India use, or any country use for that matter? Will the US come out and say that we are going to recognize the Taliban because so and so considerations were made? Will the UK say that? Again, China has interest, and China doesn't have the greatest history when it comes to human rights. So what will China say, right? So all of this becomes a platform for international cooperation for the protection of women's rights. Giving legitimacy to the Taliban becomes a tool, becomes a leveraging point, right? Obviously, in the past few days, you can say that there has been a gross and blatant violation of what is known generally as women's rights, right? But if you ask a Talibani that, if you ask someone who empathizes with the Taliban, you will say that they have opened up far more than what they were. Right? They have gone from young girls going to school and shooting them in the head to, okay, we can look at considerations for women to go and work in offices and continue their education as long as they are in their hijab, right? So for someone seeing that, it's probably a big change, right? But what the international platform feels about this change, or what they feel is just a garb of this, like it's just a garb for the Afghanistan to swiftly take power and swiftly gain recognition, is a matter to be deliberated, to be found out, right? Now, again, whenever we've spoken about conflict, I remember we've spoken about Syria, we've spoken about Kurdistan earlier, we've spoken about Ukraine, we've spoken about, let's say, Spanish conflicts that have happened over there. We've always had, like, when the conflict is ongoing, our conversations lead towards, time is yet to tell us what is going to happen. Time is going to tell or show us that the Taliban is good or bad, or these people are good or bad, or what Moscow says in the next 15 days, or what Beijing says in the next 15 days. Does Washington really come in and have a say, or will they be quiet till their interests are proven? Or does, and in today's time, does New Delhi have to say about it, right? So my basic point is that these conversations lead to a more of, let's see how it pans out. Let's see how. What I want to discuss more vividly today is the current scenario, what is happening, and what the Taliban has done. Okay, what are the possibilities of having a government in exile? We don't know yet, because the Vice President Saleh has taken forward and said that he will lead with a as an opposition, as someone, his speech more or less showed some sort of civil disobedience, civil conflict that might arise after that. So he is there. Then there is, of course, Hamid Karzai, who is planning on going back. I'm not sure if he's gone back. I'm sorry, I didn't read that. But as far as I know, Dr. Bhattacharya, correct me if I'm not wrong, he's still planning to go back. And these individual events are affecting the Taliban's movements. They are not sure of how the international platform will take up their action. They are not sure what Beijing will say. They are not sure what Moscow will say. Of course, in the situation where I'm assuming there have not been back channels between the Taliban and Beijing or Moscow, right? But what the Taliban is sure of is their immediate power over the citizens, and moreover, their power over the female citizens. You see, when we've studied female violence and assault on women, we've seen that it does not come from a place of lust, or from a place of the need of pleasure. It comes from the drive of power, because it is a patriarchal society. Even in India, for that matter, when you take up any case in India, it is a patriarchal society, and we see this that the man has a power over the woman. That is why this violence takes place. So in many ways, it is to reaffirm this patriarchal power, right? Which of course is not being questioned, which of course is the last thing that is going to be questioned. In many ways, it's the last thing that is going to be questioned when this transition of power is happening, when this conflict is ongoing. So where do women fall in this? We have seen in the past few days, again, women outside, they are discussing and they are protesting against whatever is happening, and the Taliban has not yet shown any amount of violence towards that. Because they know that that this is the kind of thing that will spark international engagement, that will spark people joining in from other platforms. There is a BBC anchor over there who I think she got famous a few days before, when her before and after Taliban picture came. She was not wearing a hijab, she was not wearing any cover, and she was reporting. And after the Taliban, the day after they took over Kabul, she had gone out to report, and she had to wear that, right? Irrespective of where she is from, what citizen she is, and whether she follows Islam or not, she had to wear that. So that amount of demographic change that the Taliban commands for, is something that is vastly concerning humanitarian workers, those who are considered about the safekeeping of the democracy, not about the security of the nation or the geopolitical outcomes of this conflict. People are concerned about the people of Afghanistan, right? So we have an estimate understanding that they are going to suffer. What are we doing about that? How are we having a conversation about that? Is again for all you interns to speak about and to rationalize and to get into the nuances of, right? uh, Again, understand, like, last year when I was in college, I was towards the end of my final year, and one of my friends, her mother was a gender sensitization officer for Afghanistan, right? And this is the time where India had peaked its humanitarian relief in Afghanistan. Right? And she was there and she said that, like, if women are given the opportunity to step out of the house and go get a piece of bread, they feel their rights uh, have been respected. They feel that they have been given their rights. So, and this I'm talking about at that point of time of Taliban occupied regions of Afghanistan, not those places that were, in many definitions, if you would like to call it, liberated from Taliban. Not these places. I'm talking about Taliban concentrates. So, so their condition then and their condition now for the entire nation is more or less the same. How we deliberate upon this, how other countries leverage this, is again what I said. These conversations will lead to this. Is yet to be seen. But the actions that have to be taken on a basis of the social fabric of Afghanistan, they are somehow missing in this conflict conversation. Somehow, geopolitical consequences and also, I hope someone's keeping the time. I'm not taking too much time. Uh, Somehow, the geopolitical conversation around it, the security conversation around it, what India needs to do to secure its investments in Afghanistan, what China needs to do to secure its vested interests in Afghanistan. These things take a forefront during conflict. What has to be spoken about more, or has to be equally spoken about, is the social fabric of Afghanistan being retained through this conflict. So that is the kind of place I want to set the panel discussion at, and I'll be happy to have conversations around whatever you all speak, and any questions for me later on.
So before we take on to other panelists, I would like to give a brief introduction of today's topic. Today's topic is about the condition of women in Afghanistan and how uh, how the newly established Taliban rule will affect it, and also what are the role of the humanitarian powers and the international community to ensure that women's rights are ensured in Afghanistan, and also to look at how post Taliban economy will affect women and what are the sort of implications of that on a broader context of women's rights. So, so going on to the next question. Sorry, I just. And the situation of women in Afghanistan is all known to us. The question we just dealt with also enlightened us with the plight of Afghani women. Amidst the crisis, do you think human rights and all the international bodies that aim at protecting human rights have a role to play? If yes, do you think they can win the battle and secure women's lives and freedom in Afghanistan? Again, keeping in mind the influence of China that now largely frame Afghanistan's economy. And I think this question is for Dr. Shayak's panel.
Okay, thank you. So, I would just like to give a brief introduction on the topic before my panelists, two other interns, they also speak up. And so, coming to the topic, first we have to have a look at the players, Taliban is one of the players, US is one of them. There are various aid agencies, United Nations is there, NATO is there, and then there is China. So these are the major players. And what are the topics we are looking at? Women and economy. Right. So when we look at the condition of women, we saw what happened during 96 when Taliban came to power. And the same thing in a bit of subdued version is again coming out through the media. So why do Taliban have to repeat the same thing every time whenever they come to power? Because as we see, they are not a democratically elected government and they always have the fear of a mass uprising because guns and bombs are so proliferant throughout Afghanistan due to Russia, due to US. They have also left a huge cache of arms and ammunition in Afghanistan. And so any day it might happen that from the northern region or from the Pashto region, people gather up and they one day walk towards violent uprising against Taliban. But when a man from the house takes up a gun and goes towards an uprising or a fighting, what he fears about? He fears about his family back home, his wife back home, his children back home, sisters back home, right? So in Afghanistan, what Taliban has done is that they have instilled this very fear among the people, among the residents, that this is what we will do to your family back home if you dare to take up certain positions or you dare to perform certain actions against us. So this is a psychological warfare against its own people. And as you have seen in Afghanistan, this time there was absolutely no resistance because people didn't want to fight just for the camera or just for the media reports that so many have died fighting the Taliban. No, they were much more intelligent this time. They simply stood away because since US has stood away, anyhow, Afghanistan, Kabul had to fall. So they simply stood away and let the Taliban in. So Taliban won this first round of psychological warfare, and to keep it at that, they have kept up the pressure on the women and they have kept up the various things which are happening, stoning of Afghan female pilots and things like that. That you have to keep up the pressure on the weakest link of the society so that others remain in their place. This is one of the policies followed by Taliban. And next, this is one of the internal implications. And next, they have also to show out something to the outside world. Like we are giving this concessions. We were previously at the worst. Now we have become better. So they have to get concessions from the world because, as you know, IMF, International Monetary Fund, they have stopped their funding. US has stopped the aid. So they need the funding, they need the aid, and they need to be recognized by the world. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game that today you will see certain sections uh, they are harming the women and they are not allowing the women. And tomorrow Taliban will say that no, we are allowing someone to come to office. And look how we are coming or going for the betterment. So we deserve the aid, we deserve the international linking, and we deserve the international recognition. So this will play out throughout the next few years. And coming to the other countries, USA, how far is it concerned with actually the safety and security of women throughout the world? I don't think that much because USA is concerned about only its own interests. USA is concerned about the economy because wherever we see that USA has a certain amount of interest, in Iraq we saw the ISIS, they were again a reflection of Al Qaeda, a reflection of Taliban. They were a violent group of people. But in Iraq, USA has its interests in oil. Various companies like Shell, BP, Aramco, they have their big oil fields, and USA has their interest to protect. And so, no matter whether ISIS was violent towards women, whether ISIS was violent towards children, USA stood against it. And there you will notice an interesting thing that not only USA was joined by France, USA was joined by Britain, USA was joined by Russia, USA was joined by China. Russia, China, France, Britain all have their holdings in oil wells across Iraq. So within a few months of the ISIS uprising, they were completely crushed. Couldn't that have been seen in Afghanistan? with the help of United Nations, with the help of all nations pulling in, couldn't the US have simply kept 60,000 Taliban fighters at bay? And moreover, Pakistan is a country which is dependent upon US aids, which is dependent upon Chinese aid. And easily with their leverage with Pakistan, USA could have stood back and kept the Taliban outside the limits of Afghanistan. But again, there are political issues in Afghanistan. Trump had already signed the declaration that we would bring back our soldiers, and bringing back our soldiers is a very emotive issue in US. It's also in every all other country, but in US, the elections depend upon it. And so Biden had no other way to go rather than bringing back the soldiers. But it was a very ill thought of and hastily thought of retreat, and they didn't plan, because when you are ruling a country for 20 years, you have various other countries like India who have set up their investments for the betterment of the country. Afghanistan had their parliament, Afghanistan had the representation of women. And in any country, the representation of women in the fields is a signal of how the nation is advancing as a whole, how the society is advancing as a whole. And more than US, I think India played its part, and Afghanistan, we had seen various representation of women even in the football and cricket teams. There was a women governor who took up the guns against Taliban. There were women Air Force fighters, and it was a nation which was looking up towards a bright future. But US didn't see any interest, any economic interest in Afghanistan to pursue a longer stay. And moreover, the corona outbreak had wreaked havoc with the US economy. So economically speaking, USA didn't find it a point to stand behind Afghanistan, go behind nation building, and look after the security of women and children. But in nations where the US has an economic interest, like in South Korea, you won't see US fleeing just because its economy is not being able to support the forces in South Korea, forces in the Indian Ocean. Wherever US finds that we have our economic interests, the forces are stationed there, and they won't be moving pretty soon. But in case of Afghanistan, whatever US says that we are concerned with the women, plight of women, we are concerned with the plight of children, we are trying to evacuate. But the first thing is the economy, and that's what they have looked at. Coming to China, it would be, if you think of, China has never fought a war in the last 30 years. Apart from the brief skirmishes in Ladakh and something in Taiwan, China has never gone for a full fledged war. What China has thought of from the 90s onwards is its economy. In the 1990s, the economy of China was about half of that of USA. But in current states, China is slowly and surely overtaking USA as one of the major economies. And as far as human rights and women rights goes, China doesn't have that much of an interest. The only thing is China wants to pursue its economic interests through the Obor Belt, the road belt it is building, and it is just counterweight to the roads and linkings India has built from the Gwadar port. So China is slowly and surely pursuing its economic interests. So what happens to women there, what happens to children there, is none of China's business or prerogative. And then coming to various aid agencies, you will see various agencies throughout the world. US has millions, thousands of them. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There is an overall United Nation. There is a Red Cross, and there is various other agencies are there, which could have stepped in. United Nations could have stepped in and prevented a humanitarian crisis from unfolding. But unfortunately, what we have seen is all the major nations, all the major aid agencies, all the major blocs, they have been a silent spectator to the plight of Afghan women and to the plight of children. If you see even the economy of Afghanistan, about 80%
Dr.
of
Saib, sir, sorry for interrupting, but we are running short of time. If you could please conclude in within 2 minutes.
all right. If you see the economy of Afghanistan, 80% of Afghanistan run on a daily budget of $2 per family. So it's a question of sustenance, and all the agencies, the aid agencies, the foreign power agencies, now they have all taken up, because of the corona crisis and the pandemic, they have all taken up their economy to be a priority. and the condition of women, the condition of children have been sent to the back burner. And it's up to the Taliban, it's up to the women themselves that uh, how they fight against it, how they form an organization and hit the roads. And it's also a question that how many rapes and how many mutilations and how many killings will be enough for the world to say enough is enough. So, with that, I end my talk and I hope our interns will take it forward. Thanks a lot.
I request the interns, the two panelists, Shaumya and Kayal Vizi, to please take over and put forth their views within 5 minutes, please.
Hello everyone, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, so what Sayed sir said, I completely agree with it. First of all, that I think all the nations and in today's world, every foreign policy step, not only of US, I think most of the nations is basically built upon the economic factor. So the priority is always economy, and obviously after this COVID-19 pandemic, everything is focused on economy, economic gains, and all. And here I would like to point out that one issue I think we are facing since history, since years, is the absence of any world government. So like even in the past we have seen that whenever this kind of a situation comes into play, so there's an absence felt that we don't have any world government or an authoritative agency which can actually dictate terms to any country in case of any human rights violation or women rights violation. So we just have like UN or any other agency can only put pressure. We don't have much to do. But secondly, I would like to say that what agencies can do or what UN can do is first we should focus on evacuating what because I was reading, I was going through some articles. So there are a lot of women agencies like Women for Women International, and I think there's one Georgetown something international. A lot of them are trying to collect donations, are trying to fund women organizations and women there, but the issue is of evacuation because women are stuck there. So I think the first step which every government, and here comes in the role of the neighboring countries especially, that the first step should be the safe evacuation of women activists, women organizations, the staff who are working there. They should be safely evacuated to safe zones and should be given humanitarian aid and medical help and all. Because if we don't help them to come out of that situation, if we don't help them to come out, they won't be able to speak for people, for small girls who are stuck there. So I think this is very important. And second thing what I feel is that when we say that what the international community can do, we as international citizens, because I think over the years we all know that the idea of universal human rights is coming up, the idea of world families coming up. So let's say, like, we as Indian citizens, we can put pressure on our own government, on the Indian government, or the same way the Britishers, the Americans, they can put in pressure on their own government, because if they know that people would not support us. So let's say that the American government knows that if we don't do anything about the Taliban issue, or if we don't do anything about the women in Taliban, we would lose here, we would lose in our own country. Because I think the last thing that any government or any politician would not want is losing something, losing in elections, losing their power. So if they know that our own citizens would not support us, or our own country would not support us, I think that would build more pressure on the governments, on the national governments, and that would obviously contribute and help, in helping the women and human, girls in Afghanistan. So I think this is what I would like to say, and I would conclude here only, and the next intern can speak up.
Thank you for your view, Soumya. I agree with your view. And presently, the situation, if we see it pragmatically, it's like the cat in the box situation. We hope for the best, and first thing is trying to evacuate the citizens of Afghanistan, like women, from the area. But another thing is, if you look at it clearly, they are repeating the pattern subdually actually. Like the women were taught to be as gift and to be president for Taliban fighters and things like that. But to move forward in from this point, we have to see and put pressure. That is the only thing as a policy and as a human beings we can do. So, and in my point of view, to see this matter, we have to go forward from the point that they can be a good, they can be a bad or situation currently we are in, and people should put more pressure on governments. And I accept your point of view. I like to finish my points.
Great, thank you, Sayak sir, and the two co-panelists, Shaumya and Kyle Vizi. Now, turning the court to again talking about how terrorism and political violence affect women, keeping in mind the dark history of the state of women in Afghanistan and the introduction of the Sharia law in Afghanistan. I would again move to Sri Rupa and Khushbu to please put forth their views on this question.
Hello,
Khushbu, I guess,
am
is
I
not there. She's facing some
am I audible?
connectivity problem. So we'll have Srirupa speak.
Okay, no issues. Yes, yes, Sri Rupa, you're audible. Please continue.
Okay, so I would like to mainly talk about the issue of Sharia law. Under the framework of Sharia law, how women were treated in the Taliban regime and how women faced exploitation and discrimination under the framework of the Sharia law, and how now in this contemporary era where some spokesperson, Taliban spokesperson have reaffirmed that they will give women rights, and based on their framework of Sharia law, and how it is creating increasing pressure and fear among women, because in the earlier regime of Taliban rule, under the Sharia law, women were very much restricted, and their freedom. Sphere, I'm speaking in the sphere of women's movement, education, and healthcare were restricted very much, and they didn't get any kind of freedom, and they had to be chaperoned by male guardian to in the matters of education or health, or basic in terms of marriage or divorce. They didn't have any right to say or speak. So what I mainly want to talk about is that the origin of Sharia law, where the Sharia law has come from. It has come from the Wahhabi movement or Wahhabia, which is an Islamic revivalist movement, uh, which talks about just cleansing the impurities of faith, and going back to revivalist movement, which means or which talks about the status of women, or makes women the pillar of the religious protection or religious duty, um, making them or creating them as pious women, or as a status symbol. Women were used there. So from this we can see that the Sharia law has always been motivated to talk about women as a symbol of their dignity and protection, as connoting them as mothers, as daughters. But on the other hand, they didn't give any kind of real freedom or employment in the matter of social, religious, economic matters. They didn't give any freedom. They have segregated men and women due to employment opportunities in public sphere, and in private sphere they have only given women the right to right to be treated as pious women or pious mothers, responsible or respectable mothers or daughters. So this is the status that Sharia law has given to women under the Taliban rule in 1996 when it has come. We can see that there are several instances where women were very much discriminated. Like Sharia Bibi, one Afghan woman, when she went to marry outside of the religion, the they created some kind of trouble for her, and they actually killed her. So, and this is only not one instance that I'm going to talk about. There are other also instances like Shushmita Bhattacharya. We all know about her. She wrote a novel, an autobiography of her escape of women, escape from the trouble, and in Afghanistan, and later she went back to Afghanistan. But what she mainly portrayed her story or troubles in the Taliban regime, and later it was a very tragic story where where she was being killed in Afghanistan. She tried to escape from it, being an Indian, but she later was being killed by the Talibans. And the Talibans, what they gave a statement that she had to be killed because she was an Indian woman and she was a spy from US. So here the terrorism and the political violence aspect can also be seen, where Talibans have didn't take care or didn't mention any women's freedom and just killed her family also in the name of being a spy of India. So we can see how women in the name of religion have been totally restricted from all the social, religious, and economic aspects. And the Islamic or the Sharia law I try to portray, this mainly focuses on this. And what I would try to draw by saying last that women, we can see that how in Taliban regime women were not given any kind of real freedom. They, when they wanted to get education or they wanted to do something in media also, women were restricted. There was no photograph, there cannot be any photograph or any images of women in the Taliban regime. If they want to show or something like nail varnish, they were being killed, they were being publicly harassed and stoned to death. So all of this we can see, and there are legitimate pressure on women when the Taliban regime has now come, that how women are now going to be treated, because we can see that women are all women now in the contemporary time also, they are not going to work. The men are going to work, but the women, the journalists, what we can see here, ki women are not going to work, are not going to school or college. So how are they going to be treated in this contemporary regime, where Taliban has said on one side that women are, we will protect the right of women under the Sharia, but they are not going to work. So this is some of the doubts that women have in Taliban, and I think this is very legitimate. And from the perspective of the terrorism aspect, I think Khushbu will speak on it. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
I guess Khushbu has dropped off because of some network issues. But nonetheless, till now, in our panel discussion, we have discussed how the Sharia law is going to affect women in Afghanistan, and how we can see Afghanistan's plight in from scope of human rights, and how do international bodies have a role to play in Afghanistan, and of course how other nations, especially nations like China, can help in revival or complete demolition of Afghanistan's economy. Now, speaking specifically from Afghanistan's economics perspective, I would invite Swakshadeep to put forward the next question for our next set of panelists.
So the question is, how do you think will economic post-neo-Taliban regime affect women, especially compared to the previous eras? And what role do you think women play in the nation's economy? And this question is to the third panel, consisting of interns Rihan and Sandeepan.
Hi everyone. So before I jump on to the the economic aspects, I'd like to make a small point which I feel is very much important to make over here. Is that right now we are just discussing that how Sharia has over the years converted into a very oppressive and orthodox law that curbs women rights. But at the same time, we should also be reminded that Islam, in its own version, has not been this regressive religion or a regressive law, a regressive structure that it is today. And I cite this through the examples of consider the Prophet Muhammad's first wife, Bibi Khadija, who herself was a very big trader back in the time. At the same time, if you consider that the proliferation of Quran in the like in the masses in all the countries would not have been possible without an important role played by two women. One is Bibi Hafsa and Bibi Aisha, because Bibi Hafsa was the one who kept the manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts of the Quran under the first caliph's regime, and these were the manuscripts that were later supplied to the masses in general, so that the Quran reached the common man. At the same time, if you see Bibi Aisha, she was the one who played an important role in spreading a lot of important hadiths to the commons. So at the same time, we need to be reminded that it has not Islam, or for that matter any religion in itself, is not a very regressive one. But over the years, as it is the people, it is the followers who make this any religion or any structure regressive rather than the religion in principle itself. So that's an important conjecture that we need to keep in mind. Moving on to the economic aspect of the Taliban, of the neo-Taliban economy. Firstly, I'd like to point out that from 1996 to 2001, Taliban has ruled Afghanistan, and it was a really bad phase for the women, especially of Afghanistan. So we need to keep in mind that since 2001, there has been a lot of development backed by USA, that women, particularly girls, completed their schools, got certain job opportunities as well. Now, consequently, the representation in the Afghanistan economy and the politics, representation of women also increased. Now, before talking about how the economy, like the role of women in the economy, it's necessary to understand the economy of Afghanistan itself. Let's start with the most recent event, that right now on Monday, Afghanistan is set to receive $460 million from International Monetary Fund. But again, the so-called Taliban government, will not be able to access that, because IMF is giving out these funds in the name of SDRs, that are those are known as a special drawing rights. So these are some a sort of international reserved assets that can be exchanged for hard currency like US dollar or British pound or the Chinese yuan or the Japanese yen. Now, Afghanistan has been banned from converting the SDRs into hard currency. It already has some amount of SDRs in its accounts, and the one that it will be getting on Monday, Taliban cannot use any of them. Now, if you understand the economy in general, economy of Afghanistan in general, you see that over 75% of the public spending in Afghanistan comes from is funded by grants from foreign aid, and majority of these grants and the public spending was focused on building the economy and the infrastructure that at the end was also important in uplifting women and minorities. Now, with a Taliban government that has no confidence of the international community at hand, the international grants and the aids are supposed to be stopped. With the money not coming from outside, women will have to face an increased tension. Apart from the regressive law that the Taliban might force, the funding will also be substantially cut off, and you cannot seriously expect Taliban, like there might be the case, but we cannot nevertheless rely on the Taliban sources of funding to be spent on the upliftment of women, for the betterment of women. So that's one major part as to why women particularly should be worried, because the funding will substantially be cut, which will be directly impacting them. Now, another important part is that $9.5 billion worth of assets have been kept in the US Federal Reserve, and US Fed has frozen all the assets of Afghanistan that it has, which means that those $9.5 billion cannot be accessed by Taliban now, as of now. And if you consider like best of best, Afghanistan can only access like 0.1 or 0.2% of the total international reserves it has, which has serious implications for people of Afghanistan in general and women in particular. Now, like let's we have discussed what Afghanistan cannot access, like the Taliban government in Afghanistan cannot access, but what can it access? Afghanistan currently has around $159,000 worth of gold and silver in the banks uh, in the banks of Afghanistan right now, as well as a $362 million in as foreign currency reserves in Afghanistan banks. These are the assets that are directly under control of Afghanistan, which we should be worried about. Now, these are the legal sources. Taliban has been associated with a lot of illegal sources as well, from like a variety of illegal acts such as drugs, and there's extortion, then there's kidnapping, and a lot of illegal activities, illegal sources. Now, the United Nations Security Council estimates that the annual income of Taliban can range from anywhere between $300 million to $1.5 billion, and that's a very substantial amount we are discussing, given the strategic importance of like the geopolitical importance of the Afghanistan as a nation, as a gateway to South Asia, and as a connecting link between the Middle Eastern and the Southern Asian part. Again, an important part is that if you consider that in 2020, Taliban earned around $464 million from its
Rehan,
mining
kindly try
sector.
to summarize your
Yeah,
portion in a
right.
minute.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'll just summarize. So one important part is that $464 million were earned only from dominating the mining sector, and Afghanistan still has huge mineral reserves. And an important part is that women play minimal role in such areas, because the traditional structure of the society has been that the mining reserves have been traditionally dominated by men. Now, that's again an important part, because the sources on which the Afghanistan's economy has been lying or will lie in the coming time is anywhere not gonna be dependent on women, which creates additional issues. A last point that I want to make here is that an important speculation is that with the assets being freezed by the US and by the major international community, Taliban will have to implement a lot of capital controls and will have to limit dollar access. Now, this essentially means that the currency, like the Afghan currency, will depreciate, and correspondingly, inflation is set to rise in Afghanistan. With inflation at rise, women will be the more disadvantaged group in the population, because they'll be the one who will be malnourished. They'll be the one who will less access to resources, and to sum it up in a nutshell, there are like 2 points. So for women, there are the problem is two-part. First, it will face a less representation in the economy and in the politics. Now, that is very much um, detrimental for the growth of women in general, because with an decreased role in the economy, women will be more marginalized and more isolated, and more will be dependent on the whims or their male counterparts for their basic sustenance and basic healthcare. Now, the second part is that an increased issues. As I said, inflation is all set to rise, and sanctions are supposed to be increased if Taliban does not change its ways, or in a way present to the international community that it has changed now. Sanctions are bound to increase from US and other countries, and with increased sanctions, females are the ones that will be more disadvantaged in the scenario. So in short, economically speaking, the scenario is not very bright for women. So unless the international community builds a lot of pressure to bring women rights in the front in Afghanistan, the 20 years of development is said to be lost, as well as women are supposed to be very much isolated and marginalized economically.
Uh, Hello, everyone.
Sandeepan, we are running
I'm
short of time, so if you could please summarize your views in a minute.
Yes, for sure, for sure. So I totally agree with a lot of things that Rihan had said, and I'll not go into the technical aspects which he have very lucidly explained. I'd rather like to focus on what was the situation when in the labor market when Taliban came into power the previous time in the 1990s, late 1990s. The labor market participation in 1996 was somewhere around 15.5%, and then it came down to 14.3%. And then from 2010, when it started rising, now it has reached in 2020, according to World Bank estimates, it was somewhere around 21.62%. Now, when the government has fled and everything has crumbled there, it were the women who came out on the street during the initial days of the Taliban rule in Kabul and said that we are not going to be confined to our household this time. So this puts in perspective that women are not ready to give up their economic working rights to the Islamic regime in Afghanistan this time. Now, during this period of U.S. occupation, I'd rather use the word U.S. occupation in Afghanistan, we saw that women, people saw the first mayor, women mayor in Afghanistan. We saw there were leaders in military and air force in Afghanistan, Afghan military and air force. But when after the peace treaty in Doha between US and Taliban began, there was an increase in the killing of women who were working in the field. There were a lot of polio vaccinators who went from door to door, who vaccinated children against polio, were killed by the Taliban during this period, not before, not after the occupation. There were several journalists of Afghan origin who were killed. There were several marketing personnel who were killed. So, and again, after the Taliban came to power, they said that they would be respecting women's rights to work. But I'd like to cite one last example and make my point that in Herat, the third largest city of Afghanistan, and in Kandahar, the second largest city of Afghanistan, we saw that in two banks, the Taliban went in, reprimanded the female workers, and asked them to leave and not to come back, and send their male, relatives to their job from the next day. So why I cited these examples is the reason that I find a total incongruity between what the Taliban has said and what it has been doing on the field. Of course, there are international implications for them, which they would be keeping in mind while acting. But yes, if this kind of situations go on for the women in Afghanistan, the economic prospects, the prospects for working again for the women seem very bleak and not without a substantial fight. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We had a very engaging session. We talked about terrorism and political violence affecting women in Afghanistan. We saw Afghanistan's crisis from the perspective of human rights and other economies playing a role in it. And of course, the economy of Afghanistan altogether. And therefore, we have got a few questions from our viewers. And the first question is aimed at Oishik sir. And one of them asks, that do you think that Taliban 2.0 will pursue a diluted version of Sharia law?
Okay, so we have to look at this from the perspective of how Sharia law has been integrated globally. Okay, because the Sharia law, even between sects of Muslims, we have seen them integrated differently. And of course, through the geographical change, we've seen people follow Islam different. What we consider the Sharia law under the Taliban regime is more of a radical perspective to this to this law, right? Or to the general practice of Islam, to the general traditions associated with the region of Afghanistan and Islam. Okay. Remember that there is a difference between what the scripture says and what is the tradition and practice of the region, right? In India, it is different. The Sharia too is different in India. People, like, you will have uh, uh, the Sharia being established within the Indian boundaries, within, the rights of male Muslims in India are different from that of the males in other religions in India. But you will not see that these are being practiced oh so often. Maybe in the rural areas it is being practiced. Maybe there are a few instances of it being practiced in the urban areas. But in general, you are not looking at Muslims practice that, especially in the urban upper class segment of India. However, urban upper class segment of not urban urban upper class segment of the Afghan area that have been influenced by these by Taliban, they can look at Sharia differently. They can enforce Sharia at different degrees. The question is that at what degree will the Taliban enforce the Sharia law? Now that depends on a few things. If given a free hand, the Taliban will get back to what they were doing in the 1990s, what they said they will do in the 1970s, and what they have always uh, actually practiced, not just said, uh, what they've practiced. Today's world, we see that as Sir was talking, Dr. Bhattacharya was talking, there is a degree of understanding between countries and Kabul, right? So, and Kabul being the center point of contact, or the representation of the Taliban, right? Today's day, we have to say Kabul is the point of contact for Taliban. Now, there there have been very significant yet not stately retributions of this current scenario. Okay, people will never speak against the Sharia law. People will speak about human rights. Okay, people will show their concern for the kind of problems that are taking place in terms of humanitarian causes throughout. Like Dr. Bhattacharya was saying about the female pilots being stoned, right? These are things that they are uh, are validating through the Sharia law, through Islamic scripture, so on, right? But it is their perception. How other countries, how other players like Dr. Bhattacharya had found, has identified the key players in this issue. Uh, these key players will hold an important point, or an important position in leveraging the degree of Sharia law being used, or the degree of traditional understanding of Taliban's day-to-day business, right? So, so as of now, what we can say that the Taliban is facing the world, saying that, see, we are much more moderate than what we were before. We are open to change. We are here to form a legitimate government, and they are not talking about Sharia law. They're not talking about what can be the extremes of their engagement with the society over there, what sort of social fabric they want to create. But they have they have also mentioned that women can go to jobs but have to wear the hijab. Like I think I'm repeating this. So we absolutely don't have an idea as to what extent the Sharia will be used for their own understanding of women's rights, for their own understanding of humanitarian rights. What we do know, as in the coming few weeks, countries can leverage their stateliness, their state recognition power, and other economic and military and security engagements to be able to uh, moderate the Taliban in a way that is acceptable to the world, right? However, don't make this the standing point of any conflict resolution. This is, of course, an exception. I'm sorry, Dr. Bhattacharya, Mr. Singh will agree. This is an exception. You can't have human rights bargained for security or for statehood or something. It's absurd. It's unethical. It is unheard of, right? Not unheard of. It has happened in the past, but but it is not how you do conflict resolution or how we approach any conflict area. But that being said, Sharia is again dependent on how the world acts on the degree of Sharia in Afghanistan is dependent on how the world acts or how the world deliberates with the Taliban. In my opinion, the Taliban will push for the maximum of their agenda within the Sharia. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. We can just hope that the countries do actually leverage their engagement so that Taliban controls whatever they can. However, I remember the last time they were in power, the external parties couldn't really do much to control the oppressions that they were inflicting on people, but we can just hope that they do it this time. Uh,
I would also like to say something on
right.
this. Um, as sir was saying that different countries have various kinds of practices regarding the Sharia law in society, politics, economy. Different kinds of structures are there. So Sharia law, now there are different interpretations. So as we can now see that the Taliban spokesperson are talking about giving women's rights under the framework of Sharia law. So what is the Sharia law? And it we have earlier seen that it has been very discriminative in practice. So and now also we can see that women and children are not going to educational institutions. So how are they going to be like they are trying to maintain a very moderate position and saying neutrally, saying that we will give all women's rights, we will give women the rights like men and work shoulder to shoulder. But how will it happen? Because we signs are there that women's and children are not going to education institutions, not going to work. So how will it happen? So I can see that there are signs of diluted version of Sharia law already. And I just hope that it doesn't turn out into the Taliban regime that happened in 1996 to 2001 era. So I think there are fears, legitimate fears among women regarding this.
Thank you so much for your comment. I think I'll move now to another question asked by the audience. This is directed to Tridivesh sir. Sir, the audience has asked how Taliban's success will impact the Islamic organizations around the world, specifically in Pakistan and Bangladesh.
Okay. So I think one thing which is evident from the last few years is that even the Islamic world is not a monolith. It's very simplistic to say, for instance, the interests of the GCC and Turkey. There have been problems between Turkey and some of the GCC countries. In recent months, of course, they've been working at resolving them. Similarly, there have been problems if you look at the differences between the Gulf countries and Iran that we are well versed with, right? And so the geopolitics of the Middle East has been witnessing quite a change in the last few years. Now, that said, specifically, if one were to look at South Asia, as far as Pakistan is concerned, we all know that what is the relationship between Pakistan and Taliban. Though in the last few days, even Pakistan has been a bit more cautious on certain. It's trying to go along with what other countries are saying. It's at least it's making a reference to women's rights, to human. If you look at General Bajwa's speech a couple of days ago, he spoke about human rights and all that. But that is all. See, every country does its own posturing. So let's not get into that. What is if one were to look at the interesting part is a country like Bangladesh, which has moved on a different path economically. Right now, Bangladesh, the statement emanating from Bangladesh is very interesting because the Bangladeshi PM actually referred to Afghanistan as an integral part of South Asia, and she made the point that that she hoped that the new government, the new formation would be inclusive, and also the fact that Bangladesh and Afghanistan obviously can cooperate in a number of areas and things like that. So that again, that so 2 points are clear. I mean, one is if you look at the Islamic world, you need to break it down, as I said. If you look at the Middle, if you look at GCC and Iran on the one hand, obviously they have different interests, right? Some GCC countries feel left out. They feel that obviously Qatar has more of leverage due to the dialogue being held over there. Now UAE has stepped in. Saudi Arabia felt that it was sort of outmaneuvered, right? So that's one part. Now within South Asia, the Pakistani interest obviously is more geopolitical. If you look at Bangladesh itself, the interest is more economic. Now, specifically coming now, the other part is that as far as the spillover is concerned, obviously even the conservative countries in the Gulf are worried about uh, spillovers in terms of any form of radicalism, right? And even if you look at Iran, the worry is different. The fact is that suppose you have the rise of Sunni radicalism, Islam is Shia, so that gives rise to Sunni Shia sort of divide. So this needs to be looked at basically simply put in three things. One is the rivalry between the GCC and Iran. That's one aspect. How that angle is dealt. GCC, Iran, and Afghanistan. Second is the part about when we come to specifically to South Asia, there it's about, I mean, whether geopolitics or economics. Largely, of course, the concern for anybody naturally who shares a border with Afghan. So Pakistan's concern, given the fact its geographical location is more geopolitical. For Bangladesh, it's a spillover of sort of radicalism. And that's why they've emphasized so much on economic growth, right? So, and finally, obviously, there are for the Taliban, people are making various forecasts and predictions that they should go along this path, they should go along that path, numerous things like that. But I think, I mean, simply since the question is related to Bangladesh, I think should be a model not just for South Asia but for many other sort of Islamic countries in terms of the trajectory which has taken in recent years, in terms of its economic growth, as well as the improvement in human development indicators. There are problems which persist, but it's an interesting case study. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. It's obvious that we can't assume that interpretation of Taliban's success will be homogeneous across all the Islamic states, and that all the countries will interpret the spillover according to their interests. Thank you for your insightful comments, sir. The next question by the audience is directed to Syed, sir. So the audience is asking how important is the role of other Muslim countries in preventing violence against women in Afghanistan?
Yeah, right. It's very, very important because as we have been hearing about the Sharia law, the interpretation of the law, there have been almost 46 interpretations, and the interpretation about the relaxations given to women, the right given to women, vary according to countries. It's something in the Arab, it's something in Dubai, it's something in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and various other countries. And we have seen that in previous cases also that even if there is a defamation of Muhammad or there is a cartoon on Muhammad, thousands and lakhs of people have hit the streets against them and there has been violence. But it's very, very surprising that given the violence against women in Afghanistan, all the major Muslim countries, they are silent. So if they remain silent or if they continue remaining silent, it may give a view that may have been many of these countries in private expect such a rule in their countries also, but in lieu of the external pressure or external relationships, they are forced to present themselves as moderate. So we expect that this is not a truth, and the countries leverage their power on Afghanistan and they hit the streets. And because it's not only for today the Muslim of Afghanistan, but tomorrow it may be Pakistan, and day after tomorrow it may be the neighboring countries. So this thing will spread out like wildfire. So the earlier it is controlled, the better it is for the Muslim world, the better it is for the world in general. So I hope that all the Muslim blocs, they are a very strong power. They are a very strong power in terms of economy, in terms of oil, and they have a strong influence on Pakistan, Afghanistan, and so they speak up to it. And not only the government should speak up, the ordinary citizens should speak up. The Muslim ladies in those other countries, they should speak up for the women in Afghanistan. And I think they have a big role to play. And whether they are playing a positive role or whether they wish to just observe from the sidelines, the time will tell. Thank you.
Hopefully, sir, that they'll leverage their power and speak for the humanity. So I think we've reached the end of the session, and I'd like to thank all the panelists for their insightful comments. As sir initially pointed out, that it's really premature to say whether Taliban is the same Taliban or Taliban has changed. In a few weeks' time, I think after they've formed a structure, we'll get a clearer picture of what exactly the geopolitical framework would look like in our region. Then, as Oswik sir pointed out, that the history of Taliban hasn't really been favorable for us to believe that they've majorly changed. If I were to put things into perspective, from 1996 to 2001, the civilian deaths were at its all-time high, and the number of girls who were enrolled in school were literally zero. So we can say that human rights was at its worst. And I was reading the other day that Taliban has allowed, girls to go to school, but they're scared of going back. So I'm not sure how long would they keep this facade of being caring about human rights, because obviously they want funding from the organizations, but I'm not sure how long are they going to keep up with this pretense. Also, in the discussion, we had very rightly spoken about world powers, how they're using the countries only for their political or economic interest in the country. Like in Afghanistan, if, so to say, the countries had their economic interest, then these countries would surely have stepped in and prevented these humanitarian crises. But perhaps maybe they didn't have much to gain, so they're just letting it be. And people who could have fled have already left. Those who couldn't, they're being killed or are being subjected to inhuman laws. As one of our panelists said, that the activists or the female faces of, so to say, Taliban, Afghanistan before Taliban should be immediately evacuated. But then the larger question is that what about those who will be left behind? What about the numerous dreams and lives that will be robbed of a bright future, which can be called because of strategic miscalculations by the world power? So we have a lot of questions that are to be answered, and it's a lot of uncertainty and about the future of millions of Afghan nationals. So all we can hope is that in the coming days they'll have a better future, and that the organization will mend its ways for more humanitarian ways. Now I'd like to invite Monali for a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Kanishka. What an engaging panel discussion it was. And I hope that soon the Afghans get to lead a life as independent and free as any other citizen of a free and democratic nation. I would like to thank all our panelists and experts, Tridivesh sir, Dr. Sayak sir, and Oishik sir, along with all our intern panelists who put forth a knowledge-filled and healthy discussion. Ms. Srirupa, Ms. Shaumya, Ms. Kyle Vizi, Mr. Rehan, and Mr. Sandeepan. Also, the session would not have been successful without our moderators, Mr. Anurand, Swakshadeep, and obviously Kanishka. Credits and gratitude to our event management, digital marketing, and idea incubation team too, and especially Pallavi ma'am for facilitating the panel discussion. Lastly, and most importantly, a big thanks to all of our viewers for joining in. We'd be glad to hear from you all about your views on the topic and on other relevant public policy issues. And for the same, you can connect with the team Center for National Policy Research through our social media handles via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, to stay tuned to more such knowledge-filled sessions, do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you once again, everyone. Hope you have a great day ahead.
Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.